of us are a little guilty of not wanting to declare everything that we earn to the taxman. So this week, Real Economy is kicking off in Linz, Austria, the home of the Johannes Kepler University, which is doing some pretty in-depth research into this murky world of the shadow economy. So on the show, we'll try and understand why people and businesses get involved in this underground economy and how it impacts our growth. We'll try and see if there are tips to pick up from where they have been winning the fight that can be translated across Europe. And then we'll ask the Johannes Kepler University's Friedrich Schneider if people who participate in this great economy really have a choice and if the issue can ever completely be resolved. In the most recent survey done in Europe, the many reasons given for not declaring goods and services sold to the taxman range from helping a friend out to not having a job, taxes being too high, or it just is the dumb thing where we live. So since we're at the Johannes Kepler University to talk about the shadow economy, let's first get a crash course on what the shadow economy really means.
Ivan is a shoemaker who's friends with Juliet, a childminder. Ivan sometimes barters his shoes with Juliet for babysitting his daughter. He sometimes sells shoes for cash to avoid paying taxes, making his shoes cheaper than the competition. Juliet's employers pay for her nanny services with one day of the week paid in cash or an envelope payment. It helps them keep her salary low, not pay her social security, and ensure she can be made to work long hours. But it also helps Juliet to save paying taxes. With Ivan and Juliet now in the shadow economy, they've not only put themselves at risk, but reduced their government's income and therefore what the government can spend on them, thus jeopardizing their and their children's futures.
That brings up the really interesting question of where in Europe we're the most in shadow. It's pretty crowded in the south in the shade, followed by the central and eastern countries, the continent, and then the Nordics. On the flip side, you can make more money in the north from undeclared goods and services than you would in the CEE. So Guillaume Desjardins headed off to Denmark to find out why people and businesses participate in the shadow economy and what its impact can be.
Walking in the streets of Copenhagen, the people you cross may have a dirty little secret. Many of them have day jobs, but earn a little extra on the side by working undeclared. When it comes to buying goods and services unofficially, Denmark ranks 4th worst in Europe, doing just a little better than Greece, the Netherlands and Latvia. I've heard about people who had someone doing undeclared work for them, but I haven't done it.
No, I don't know anyone who does black work, but I've known someone who had.
I think people do it because salaries are high and they want to save money and they don't think about their conscience, and they should.
They're cheapskates. They want to have a nice life and they don't want to pay for it. It's as simple as that.
The estimate of taxes lost in Denmark from shadow goods and services is 1.5 to 3 billion euros. Across Europe, it's more than 450 billion.
Undeclared work is a bit like freeloading. If I don't buy a ticket, it won't keep the train from leaving. But if no one does, who will pay for new trains, repairs, or the conductor's wages? In any case, I did get my pass.
Many in Europe are going legal too, with the realization through the financial crisis that social dumping and unfair competition drains resources that can be used for important public needs.
It means you're in a really vulnerable position. Unemployment benefit. If there's not paid any insurance for you, for example, holiday pay, maternity leave, whatever. And if you're undeclared, you're not entitled to all that. So you're not an integrated part of society, you're on the fringes of society.
Most of the employers is paying their taxes, and then if some companies does not pay their taxes and use black work, then it's an unfair competition. Then you can compare it to a soccer or a football match where the one team, they play with 11 players, and then the other, those who are cheating, they're allowed to play with 13 or 14 players.
So how does a company legally borrow money to grow if the books have been fiddled? With many employers looking for cost cuts, even in Denmark, 1 in 5 Danes have worked in the shadows at least once in the past year. Across Europe, that number is large and can drop only by boarding a solid jobs boat.
With us is Europe's foremost expert of the economics of working in the grey, the underground, the very many names we have for the shadow economy, Professor Friedrich Schneider. Why do people get into this? Do they have a choice in Europe?
A lot of especially poorer people do not have a big choice. There's a huge demand for shadow economy work. It is easy, you can do it quickly, and you might get 50 or 100 euros or 200 euros per week. Money which you quite often urgently need for buying vegetables or other things. Of course, if someone is unemployed, he has a stronger incentive to work in the shadow economy. He needs extra money because official wage loss is quite heavy.
There are businesses who indulge in that. They have an issue of access to finance. That leads to a vicious cycle down the line, doesn't it?
To some extent it does. Also, the shadow economy activities are much cheaper. They make a better calculation and a higher profit for firms. And if they all of a sudden stop working in the shadow economy, become more expensive, tax authority also may realize it. Most shadow economy workers have a job in the official economy and in the shadow economy, so they already have the total tax burden on their official wages paid to them. So they think this is my type of tax rebellion. And it's not amazing that people then work in the shadow economy to avoid these taxes.
Now, that's a nice segue to head back to Guillaume in Denmark, where 59% of Danes know somebody who participates in the shadow economy, but more than 3/4 of the population know that there's a price to pay if you get caught, namely all the taxes you end up owing and fines on top of that. So can the new European platform against the shadow economy really pick up any tips from the Danes?
Over the last 10 years, Denmark has unveiled a large arsenal to fight off-the-books transactions. These range from bans on cash payments to stronger controls and awareness campaigns.
In just a few years, Denmark has made significant progress as far as undeclared work is concerned. This is due to a general awakening amongst Danes about the consequences of hidden work.
When we started to measure these black activities, that was back in '94 actually. We started around 3% of GDP when we started to measure it, and now it is approaching 2% of GDP. So there has been, we could say actually, quite a decrease when you look at value.
After a 10-year battle, Denmark's got rid of a third of its shadow economy and is primed to hand out tips to fellow EU member states. To help pass on that advice, Europe's new platform against undeclared work brings together labour and social security inspectorates, tax and migration authorities and representatives of employers and employees. The aim is to share best practices, information, awareness and strengthen cross-border operational cooperation and reduce the cost to Europeans.
Our healthcare systems, our public service systems cannot function in the long run if we don't pay into those various systems that we have. Those companies who engage themselves in shadow economy do not participate to the overall well-being of societies, and therefore we should fight them as hard as we possibly could.
But taking that fight to the extent of sharing tax information on citizens is a touchy topic in Europe. Still in its nascent stages, this battle will be a long one before Europe can fully be pulled out of the shadows.
Still with us is Professor Friedrich Schneider. The EU platform to address the shadow economy. What's your opinion of it?
Each country has different ways and means to reduce the shadow economy, either with higher punishment or with incentive-orientated measures. And this is so different all over Europe that one couldn't speak of a common popular policy to reduce the shadow economy within Europe. If I do something with you and later on give you 50 euros that you helped me, so what is this? Yeah? Is this shadow economy work? In some countries it is, in some countries it's a friendship donation. And in the Scandinavian countries it's much quicker, pure shadow economy activities compared to Spain or Italy or to Greece or even in Austria. If you observe a burglary, you immediately call the police. If you observe in your neighborhood, oh, the painter is coming on a Sunday or Saturday, no one would call the police and say, look, there is one who employs a shadow economy worker.
How do you then calculate the shadow economy?
You ask people, some overstated, some understated, and then you get a detailed knowledge about the size of a shadow economy in a country. The other method is that you analyze why people work in the shadow economy and bring them into connection with the use of cash. Let's say in Britain the shadow economy was last year 9%, so if one would subtract the legally bought material, the real extra value of the GDP for Britain would be 6%. But 6% of extra GDP is a lot for Great Britain, a lot.
Would those jobs actually exist if it wasn't in the shadows?
Would all these activities be transferred to the official economy? No, of course not. Cleaning would cost, at least in Austria, roughly double what you pay now. So it's an average wage rate between 8 and 10 or 12 euros. Officially, it would cost between 60 and 20 euros. And then people say, if I have to pay so much, I clean myself. Full stop.
The shadow economy has existed for centuries. Is there a way to solve it, or is it just that we have to somehow control it?
If you have strong incentives created by the state, a tax deduction, then you shift it. And then a part of shadow economy activities are produced in the official economy so that the tax loss due to the tax exemption is compensated. This is the most profitable method. Punishment works to some extent, but not in a very efficient way. We have to face that we will have always a shadow economy in Europe at a different size, but if we could reduce it by a third, by half, it would solve a lot of our tax loss problems.
Professor Schneider, on that note, thank you for helping us try to come out of the shadows a little bit, and thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.